thought I would do this video on what my health anxiety was like when it was at its worst, because it stayed that way for quite some time, years in fact. Back in 2009, shortly after I developed health anxiety, I had quite an unhealthy routine. It was a routine based on survival, so I can understand why I did the things that I did, although in hindsight I see now how counterproductive all of those things were. I would get up in the morning and I would have only had probably about 2 hours sleep. So I'd get up in the morning and find that very difficult in itself. Then I would go in and take a shower. That's on the days I could actually manage to take a shower. I wasn't showering every day because having the shower was quite a trigger for me, and it still is now, but I've managed to push through and I'm back to daily showers. So what would happen is I would go into the bathroom, sit on the toilet, and after going to the toilet I would analyse what was in the toilet to make sure there was no blood there. Then I would get into the shower and I would have to shower without looking at my body, so I'd keep my head at eye level so that I didn't look downwards, because as soon as I looked down I would start an internal checking process of, you know, noticing things on my body that perhaps could be worrying. Washing my hair was extremely difficult because I developed a fixation with the fact that I might be losing my hair, and I was terrified of washing it in case it fell out. And when I got out of the shower it was hard drying it because I was frightened that it would fall out. So that was quite a stressful process. I would get out of the shower and then go to brush my teeth, but I would have to brush my teeth without looking in the mirror, because if I saw my reflection, I would start the same internal processes again of checking. So I would look in the mirror and I would start focusing on things like whether my skin tone was right, whether or not my pupils were different sizes that might indicate I had something wrong with me. You know, it was quite irrational, and I still have elements of that in my daily process. So I would get out of bed. Most mornings I didn't eat breakfast. I would go and sit in the lounge, and it would take me probably about 3 hours to get dressed, just because I would be in a state of paralysis. I'd just be sat there on the sofa, unable to move. Then I would be gripped by the anxiety, and I wouldn't know what to do, so I would go and Google the symptoms to try and give myself reassurance. A lot of things happened along the way in this journey. This it's not quite as simple as it sounds. For example, my process in the evenings would usually involve going to bed because I was chronically tired and I was sleep deprived, and the reason I'd only get about 2 hours is because I felt extremely insecure going to sleep when I knew everybody else was asleep, because it made me feel like there was nobody there if there was some kind of emergency with me and I needed help with somebody to get me to the hospital. So I would go to bed, but I would, firstly I tried to deal with it by setting my alarm for every 30 minutes so that I could wake up and check that I was still alive, because I was totally convinced that I could die in my sleep, or I would die in my sleep. So I would eventually get to sleep at about 5:30 a.m. because that was when you started hearing traffic back on the roads and people around, and the sky was getting lighter, so I felt more reassured. So I would sleep for probably about 2 hours before I got up, and that was still with the 30-minute timers on. So I was only ever getting probably about 20 minutes proper sleep at a time. Talking with my food processors in the mornings, not so much in the mornings, but I developed a very strong fear of anaphylaxis. So I was terrified that if I had something that my body couldn't tolerate, I would go into anaphylactic shock. So I stopped eating so many foods that I hadn't had in a long time. Eventually I did start to try and tackle the process, and I remember one day having some raw pepper, red peppers, and not the hot ones, and being terrified to eat them, so having my brother stood next to me whilst I ate a piece to make sure that if anything happened he would be there with me, just so that I could reclaim, an extra vegetable to use in my food. In this whole process, in the beginning, I actually put on 3 stone because I was unable to prepare and cook meals because of my stress levels, and that resulted in me eating a lot of comfort foods and a lot of junk food, just simply to put food in my stomach. So I put on loads of weight. I started to get quite ill and aching and a lot of pain everywhere, and this routine had been going on for a while, and I'd had loads of checks and everything at the doctors with no results, and I insisted on having a B12 blood test because I tried everything else and everything else was normal, and it wasn't showing me as having anemia, but I was having symptoms that mimicked anemia. So I requested a B12 blood test, and it turned out that obviously B vitamins protect your nervous system, so they're a large factor in your stress and anxiety levels. Because I'd had so many panic attacks and I had panic disorder because they were just frequent all the time, I'd actually depleted my iron stores. So I had symptoms mimicking anemia. So that took me 2 years to recover from, and I had every virus that you could imagine. So it was very difficult for me in those early days, and this was probably for the first 2 years. I needed chronic reassurance, and I couldn't find a way of getting it. I was using online forums, but they weren't really reassuring me. So at the time I was probably seeing the doctor, making appointments once a week, if not twice, calling the out-of-hours doctors some days when I was really freaked out. And I believe at the time we had a thing called NHS Direct, which was a 24-hour phone line for medical advice. And I think I was probably calling them about 4 to 5 times a week, having panic attacks and scared about symptoms. So it was quite difficult. I gave up alcohol just before I developed health anxiety, and as a result of not knowing how to translate to people what was going on with me, in the beginning I was going out 4 to 5 nights a week with my friends, and by the time I was a couple of weeks into my health anxiety, I had no friends left and I wasn't going out anymore. So I became a hermit, and then I developed a fear of intimacy because I was just feeling vulnerable, and sadly that's gone on for quite some time now. I haven't actually had a partner for 12 years now because I'm just terrified of it. And my social anxiety, although it's improving, I think the health anxiety damaged me in so many ways, and lost my confidence. So it's affected the quality of my voice. My voice trembles quite often because I'm so accustomed to panic attacks and hyperventilating. Thankfully, I don't really have panic attacks often anymore. But I think the amount that I did have in the past, when I still had panic disorder, has caused me to have breathing issues quite often, and it affects the quality of my voice because my voice wobbles. And that's just like, it's almost like adrenaline surges that I constantly get. I literally, when I was at my worst, I used to try bargaining when I went to sleep, and just, I'm not a religious person, but I'd lay in bed saying, you know, please let me just survive till morning, just don't let me die in my sleep. And that was, there's my voice going. That was my headspace for quite some time. It was just all about death. I was terrified of dying. I felt like the Grim Reaper had, you know, taken up residence in my house and was following me around. It blurred the lines between fact and fiction. I was so sleep deprived that I think I was. It was very difficult to. I was quite delusional. I used to think that something like my arm was swelling up, and I'd look at both of them, and I couldn't tell whether or not my brain was playing tricks on me. And I would say I was stuck in this perpetual hell for probably about 5 years before I started to get to grips with tackling recovery. Because I think back then I just thought that at some point it might just go away. So that's where I came from. Thankfully, I'm not in that place anymore. But I think it's good to talk about, you know, the extent you went to in the past, just so people can get a true picture of what's actually going on in your mind. It's easy just to think that because people can't see an illness that you don't suffer from one. And I think the trouble with health anxiety is a lot of that neurosis actually happens behind closed doors, so we tend to keep it private from people so that we don't get mocked or, you know, people criticising us for the fact that we're just trying to cope, and they make an assumption that we have choice and that we're choosing to be the way that we are. So we tend to keep that private after a while when we've had enough bad experiences with trying to open up to people. So anyway, hopefully that will give you an idea of my background, so you'll understand that even by looking at these videos I look like a human being now. Back then I looked like a ghost. So I hope that's helpful to some of the people that don't suffer from health anxiety, to understand what their friends and family are going through if they do suffer from it. It's a very serious disorder, and I think in order to understand it, you really need to talk to these people that are suffering from it and actually understand what's going through their mind, because without that they're trapped and they're in a world on their own, and it's very lonely in there. Okay, until next time, bye bye.